Welcome to Redefining Real Estate. I'm Rylan.
And I'm Morgan. Expect a mix of education, humor, and authentic conversation as we explore all things real estate.
Let's jump into today's episode.
So today we're going to be talking about the red flags in real estate, what to look out for so you can try to avoid bad deals at all possible cost. So Rylan, I know you had some things on your mind that you mentioned to me that you wanted to go over. What was one of the top things you had?
Yeah, I think the biggest one that I have is too good to be true pricing. So a lot of the times, clients will see a home, they're like, oh my gosh, like this is perfect. Why is it so cheap?
Yeah.
And they're all excited, and you go to the property, and you soon, very, very soon, once you get there, you figure out exactly why the pricing may be as low as it is. And it kind of just can crush your spirits a little bit. But, even if you don't notice it right up front, you may be finding something in inspection reports or whatever it may be. But yeah, sometimes if a home is just severely under market value, there's probably a pretty good reason for that.
Yeah, and even, I would say, even if it's not priced under market value, but maybe it's priced, in a price range that is very uncommon for your market.
Mm-hmm.
Like in our market, that would be like somewhere around 100 to 120,000.
Right.
Like, and it's something livable, at least a 2-bedroom, in a good location. I actually showed a property over the weekend that it was off market, but my client had seen it previously when it was listed. I think it was like 3 or 4 years ago, like 2021-ish.
Okay, yeah.
It's a really interesting property that's a mobile home, but it's got this wood facade all the way around it. But it's like, the only way I can describe it is like, imagine vertical slats of wood.
Right.
That's like all the way around. It looks very modern, looks very cool. I think it was originally listed for like $100,000 back then. And she didn't end up buying it because there was a financing situation that the owner wanted. That she couldn't accommodate. But when we went and saw it this time, it was off market. It was in a completely different condition, but they did provide us the inspection reports from when they purchased it. And I remember her saying, like, this was the property for me that got away. Like, I still think about it to this day, years later. And when we looked over the inspection reports, like, all the things that we saw there, regardless of like the condition inside as far as like cosmetic stuff, all the serious things were still there. Like,
Still apparent.
Yeah, underneath the property, like, it was a mobile home, like I said. So there was like insulation falling down. It was super like moist underneath the property.
Right.
It wasn't secured properly to the ground. Like, all of these big things were still an issue then. So I think that really just kind of goes along with what you said of like, there's a reason a property is priced the way it is, and you just have to be aware that there's probably something going on with it and be okay with those risks.
Yeah, for sure. I agree. It may not be, a deal breaker, but it's, you just have to be very aware of those situations and kind of just take it one step at a time, and just understand what you're getting into because, again, it's probably the biggest investment you've made, and it's going to be one that you're going to be stuck with for a while. So you want to make sure it's a good one.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said, it just depends on, is that a risk you're willing to take? What are your thoughts on that? A lot of people, especially with the property, if it's going to be their primary residence, they don't want to take a lot of risk and whatever that might mean. If it's an investment property or maybe you already own investment properties, and you're probably a little bit more lenient with what you're comfortable with and what you're willing to spend money on or what you're willing to overlook for a certain price. But I think a lot of people have a different expectation, or in their mind they think like, I'd be willing to purchase this property for this price, and then they find out all the other things that come along with it.
Right. And now they're like, well, it's worth less now,
Yes.
So they want to reduce price, and the seller may not be willing to do that, which is actually my next talking point. The home's sitting on the market for a very long time, and also kind of some unusual seller behavior. So recently we've run into that, which we talked about that a little bit in the last episode.
Mm-hmm.
My client and I ran into that a lot recently. We submitted a lot of offers, and all the homes were overpriced, like by a good amount, which at first we weren't too worried about at the time, but then we kind of figured out that they'd been sitting for over 200 days or something, a long time, and again, overpriced. And then the seller was completely unwilling to negotiate on price, really. They were hard charging for that number.
Mm-hmm.
And there just wasn't much wiggle room with any of that. So kind of just, I don't know if it's a red flag that the seller's behaving weird, or maybe they just have something else personal going on with the property, but it is very frustrating when that, event occurs. And, especially whenever you're running comps and you're doing all those things to prove that it is overpriced. And they kind of just tell you no.
Yeah, there's no real answer or closure there, and I've experienced that, like we talked about in the last couple of episodes. But I've also experienced it on the other end, where I'm a listing agent and I have a seller that is, very set on getting a certain number. And I think what can be really helpful is just being honest with the other agent and being like, listen, like my seller wants this number. I know this is the situation, but this is where we're at. So, it can be very difficult, especially right now when there's so low inventory on the market. There's not a lot of options for people to choose from. So you end up in the situation where you guys had, where you've like made an offer on like every single property in the price range in the location that your client wants, and there's no one that's budging. It's very frustrating, but I think right now is also a hard time for listing agents and seller expectations.
Right.
At least from the conversations I've had with some sellers, they're still really set on pricing it like at the top of the market, which in the last couple of years wouldn't have been an issue since things were moving so quick. There were a ton of buyers, but now it's like, okay, interest rates are higher. No one is, going to be knocking down your door when you're priced so high. But yeah, that's just what I've experienced.
Who do you think has to bring like more strategy to the table nowadays? Do you think it's sellers, or do you think buyers have to be more strategic with their offers?
I want to say it's really sellers, because the expectations have been different for so many years now, as far as like not needing to prep for photos, not needing to really get things ready at the house to put it on the market. I think people tend to lose sight of like, oh yeah, like the first time it goes on the market, like that is everything. That first couple of weeks is like everything. It's just like you're bringing a new product to market, right? Like you're bringing a new product to the store to sell. Like how you market it in the very beginning is how people will remember it, and that's when you get the most interest. So I think that sellers right now need to be a lot more strategic, because that's why the houses are sitting on the market. That's why they're not getting, like you can't ask for the highest amount possible and also like not do anything to prep the house.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
I agree.
There's like, you can ask for the highest amount possible, you can ask for or do that strategy, but you can't also not do anything at all to the house.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think years ago maybe the buyer had to be a little bit more strategic to be, the prettiest offer in the inbox, because there's just so many. But yeah, nowadays I definitely think that the sellers are having to put in a little bit more work to make sure that their home's in the best condition possible to really support that sales number.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah, I think the only time that buyers have to be overly strategic is when it becomes a multiple offer situation, which I do feel like I've experienced twice already in the last 2 weeks, of like, house has been on the market for a while, my client goes to offer, and then all of a sudden other people are offering on it.
Right.
Which I think what's happening is like we submit the offer first, and then they're calling everyone that's interested in the house that's shown it recently and being like, hey, we have an offer.
Just letting you know, yeah.
Yeah, just letting you know, and then that kind of sparks the sense of urgency with other people, which sucks for the person who put in the first offer.
Yes.
And especially when the house is overpriced and you can't justify to your people like where they even have it listed, and other people are just putting in an offer at list price. I think that can be very frustrating for buyers right now.
For sure, especially whenever like your initial offer was so like backed up by research, like that's like exactly what the home is worth, like that's what the offer was accepted at. Now it's like, hey, you just have to pay more just to get the home, like,
right. You lose all of your leverage.
Yes, for sure. And it's not like a data driven decision. It's kind of just like a, if you want it, this is what you have to do situation.
Yes.
So it's a lot more emotional, and like, if you really love it that much, how much are you gonna potentially overpay for it?
Yeah.
Which can be tricky, and again, I think it gets a lot more emotional during that time, but it also is a relief whenever you win those situations.
Yeah, I think the conversation that I had with my clients was just like cost versus risk, right? I mean, if you're planning to be in a house for 7 to 10 years, and this is the house you want, and it checks all the boxes, and it's, you can't imagine not living in this home, then if you pay $7,000 or $10,000 over what the data is saying, mind you, of course, it still has to appraise, but that's a different conversation.
A whole other issue there. Yes.
But say like the data we run, we can't justify the price where it's at, and it's $10,000 over. Like, say you do spend $10,000 extra dollars that you initially hadn't planned for, in the long run, over 10 years, is $10,000 really a lot when you're going to get that in equity, like absolutely over that amount of time back, probably potentially tenfold. So that's the conversation I had with my clients. And of course, you know, there's other things in the offer that can make it strategic or stronger besides just the sales price. But for many sellers out there, or many listing agents, it seems like all they're doing is taking our emails and like forwarding it to the seller. They're not actually going through them and saying like, oh yeah, like look, they were very strategic in this way. It's like they're just looking at the bottom line.
Right, and yeah, like the sales price is on like page 1, so like they're just gonna scroll, see it, and like, you know. So that is frustrating. I definitely think that it needs to be a lot more of a sit down, you know, and have a big discussion over all pages, not just the, you know, just the sales price, but unfortunately, you can't make that mandatory. So everyone has their own ways of doing things, and a lot of the times it comes down to just the big number.
Yeah. Okay, so what's the next thing that you have on your list?
Strange listing photos or lack thereof.
Okay, so strange as in like cell phone photos or?
Cell phone photos, or if you can tell that everything is like, you know, say you can see the baseboards in every single photo, but then in the master bedroom you can't see the carpet or something. That could be an indicator of a red flag. Like, you know, the carpet may be super like dirty or have a huge stain, or there may be some sort of damage. I experienced that with my client back in January. The bathroom wasn't like properly photographed. Like it was just like 3 foot of like the ground you just couldn't see. So like anything above 3 foot, like that's where the picture was.
Yeah.
And the framing on everything else was perfect. And I didn't really think anything of it at the time. And that was whenever I was out of town and you showed her that property for me.
Right.
And you let me know that there was a lot of damage by like the tile in the shower or something like that. And my client mentioned that to me too. She's like, yeah, like they did not show that in the photos. Like it's gonna have to be repaired, all these things. And I clicked back through the photos and I was like, they didn't picture it, you know?
Yeah.
And
of course not, right?
Exactly. Yeah. You're not gonna market something that's damaged and that I don't want to use the word lazy, but I'm going to, if you're too lazy to repair it, you know, or, you know, just to discuss it in something. So I have that as a red flag. Always be aware of the photos. You know, obviously if they're cell phone photos, that's not really ideal. Even if they're professional, you got to just make sure that they're at least tracking with the same frame rates and they all look uniform with each other. Because if they're not, and they're professional, it may be for a reason.
Yeah, well, I think it's important for people to understand the perspective of the reason for the photos. Like the reason for the photos for consumers or buyers is to get you like curious and just interested enough to make a showing.
Right.
It's not to show you every single detail. So that's another reason why it's important to actually go and look at the property.
Right. Because
the photos can, you know, tell one side of the story, and then in person, you know, there's smells, there's details that you can see that, you know, are not going to be pictured in a photograph.
Correct.
And I've had that happen to me many times where cosmetically in the pictures they look amazing. And of course, like real estate photographers do a great work.
Yes.
You know, so they're going to make the space look huge and feel open and bright. Like that's the point, to get you interested enough to go take a look at it.
Yes.
And then once you get in the door, you know, it could be a completely different situation.
Without a doubt. I think you touched on a different point too there with smells. I almost wrote that down, like overpowering like air fresheners or something. Like if you walk in and like they have candles lit everywhere or something like that, you know. I don't know if it's even, I didn't write it down because I think it'd be really worth it, but there has been times where there's like those Febreze things like all throughout the house, and it kind of makes you wonder if they're like trying to like mask a certain smell, or they're trying to get rid of odors or whatever it is that like you may not smell like up front, but you move in and it smells like just gross, you know, and maybe something that you didn't notice, or maybe there's like, you know, like a mold smell or something along those lines. But yeah, again, not something that I think is like a huge red flag. I think some people are probably just trying to be like polite, but could be a red flag.
Yeah, no, I've had a listing where we listed it once when it was tenant occupied, and it was not student rental. It was like a property over in Creek Meadows. And when the tenants were living there, they had, I want to say, at least 1 or 2 large dogs. But we went and took pictures. I didn't notice an overpowering like odor of any kind as far as pets go. But then when they moved out and we relisted the property, the pet smell was overwhelming. It was crazy. And it was just such a weird difference between like them having all their stuff in there and it not really having the pet smell versus them taking everything out and that was the only thing you could smell.
Yes.
And I think that's something that for vacant houses can be really difficult. Is like they're always going to kind of have a smell because you're not living in them. And it's hard because vacant houses are the easiest to show, but they're also the easiest to like ignore things and forget about. Like if a house has been on the market a couple of months, like most likely it's going to start smelling a little like not musty, but
it's
just
like
kind of stale.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. It's always interesting whenever you do go show a vacant home, if it's you know, like an owner occupied thing, not like a builder, but yeah, you just never know what you might find, or what will be apparent after a couple months of someone not living there. But yeah, I think it's just something to be discussed and just to kind of be aware of for both buyers and sellers, just because you obviously want to know what you're getting yourself into. And as a seller, I mean, you don't want your house to smell bad. You don't want people to walk in and go, ugh, you know, like that's not their goal, obviously. They may have not even been aware of the pet smell either.
Exactly.
So yeah, I think it's just a good talking point for sure, and something to just kind of keep in mind if you do own dogs, cats, turtles, you know, whatever.
Any kind of pet with an odor.
Or a turtle, yeah. Turtles
or a turtle.
Do turtles? Anyways. Next thing I have is big price drops. They may be struggling to get an offer, so they're just doing huge reductions, and that could be indicating either, I think one of two things. Like one would be like a motivated seller, like they're willing to work with you. The second could just be there's an underlying issue with the property that's causing them not to get any offers, which could be literally anything, but that is what I have for a red flag.
Yeah, I think that it can definitely mean a couple of different things, like you mentioned, especially depending on what price point you're looking at. You know, if you're looking at $250 to $350, a large price reduction, like if it's over a 5% price reduction, usually that seller is pretty motivated, like they need to get the property gone pretty quick. Or also they're just, you know, taking the recommendation of their agent. If they don't want the property to sit on the market long, price reductions are kind of necessary to not let the house get stale on the market.
Yes.
And, you know, the other thing is maybe the seller is like just kind of like impulsive, or like I need this gone now. You know, I'm ready to get it gone. I feel like the houses that need a lot of work, they usually aren't the ones that are doing the big price reductions.
I could agree with that.
They're usually the ones that are stuck at a certain price and they do not want to lower it. Like they're in their minds, they're like, well, someone should just make an offer, you know?
Yeah, I agree. I think especially in like the, you know, sub 350s, maybe like more investor geared people, like they, you know, they want their house at this price, and come on, it's just a little work. Like you just make me an offer and we'll figure it out from there.
Yeah.
And then figuring out is not adjusting the price.
Yes.
But trying to negotiate some repairs or having a contractor come out. But yeah, I agree.
Yeah, most buyers' perspective is they want something that's move-in ready. They don't want something that needs work.
Right.
So I think the expectations and perspectives are just off in that sense a lot of times.
I agree. The next thing I have is like zoning restrictions. Say if you want to do something in the future with the home, you want to be sure that like you can actually do that. If you maybe want to put in a pool one day, making sure that you have the capability to actually do that in the future. Just because that'd be a huge bummer if you planned on doing that and you didn't do any due diligence to check out that if that was even possible. And then soon you find out that you're not even able to. So that's another thing I have.
And I think with zoning, the other big thing in our area is going to be how many unrelated occupants can stay in the house.
Yes.
If you're going to own or occupy it, that's not a huge deal. But if in the future at some point you might want to rent it out, or there might be a sliver of chance, or even just for resale purposes, like if the neighborhood is starting to change, like you're starting to see more rental properties in a certain area, you want to make sure you get with your agent or do your own research to make sure that they allow, you know, more than 2 unrelated occupants, especially if, I don't know, I feel like in our area, like so many places are becoming occupied by students that probably were never meant to be.
I agree, yeah.
Because the university is just growing so quickly and there's not a ton of like affordable places for them to stay.
Right.
So I think that is a huge thing, and that could be something through the city zoning, or it could be like HOA deed restrictions that don't allow for more than so many unrelated.
For sure. I think that you touched on that point where like some areas are becoming student rentals that like they probably never really designed them to be. And yeah, I think the demand for, having your student live off campus somewhere is through the roof. And some parents are becoming investors maybe sooner than what they thought they'd be.
Right.
But, it's cool to see, but it's also like, I can imagine like someone like living in their own home for, 50 years or whatever it may be. And then like you look next door and like some students are moving in, you're like, what is going on? It may be a different shift, but again, I don't think that would necessarily hurt your property value. So
Right. I think it's just something to consider, like you said, a potential red flag depending on what your situation and what your strategy is going to be.
for sure. I think another thing to be aware of is like the home's history, like if it has any title issues or any liens on the property. I know that kind of comes up a little bit later in the process, but always something to be aware of because that could really disrupt a lot of certain things, seller or buyer.
Yes, if you are considering purchasing a property off market, please use a title company. Like, obviously we're real estate agents, so we want you to use us. But if you're in a situation where you're buying from a family member or family friend or whatever the situation is, like please use a title company. Please make sure that everything is done correctly and that you don't have any potential future problems
Yes.
when you go to resell it in the future.
If someone ever comes like knocking on the door and it's like, hey, like I'm actually like the rightful owner, like, and you don't have anything to back it up, I mean, like who's to say that they're wrong,
Yeah, well, I think the situation that may be more relatable for people is, for example, we don't have a ton of like super old properties here, but we do have properties built, in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s. And I know like my grandpa in particular, he bought some land over off Highway 21 and he didn't use a title company. He must have bought it like back in the 70s, right? It was more like a handshake deal. He paid cash for it. So there was not really a need to use a title company at the time.
Right.
And then when we did title work to look into potentially developing the property and eventually selling it, turns out there is a lot of issues with the heirship of whoever he purchased it from, because the title company wasn't used, so like the ownership didn't fully get transferred over. And when it comes to heirship, say I buy a piece of property from you, and then you're married, you have 3 kids, you pass away, and now I have to go to each of your 3 kids and your wife to like get signatures. And if your kids had kids, your kids' kids had kids, then like you have to go to, especially if you didn't have a will, which a lot of people don't. It becomes this whole huge headache. And so I've seen that many times when it comes to old properties that someone's uncle or grandpa bought back in the day with a handshake deal, and now it's coming to, bite everyone in the butt.
Yes, I think that is something to always be aware of for sure. I really think all of this is just kind of going back to like doing your due diligence when you're purchasing or selling your home. Having a trusted expert by your side is always going to be a huge win for you. And just really just like taking the time to do the research, that way you can make educated decisions and have proper expectations too.
Yes.
That's going to be a big thing for me.
Yeah, well, something you've mentioned many times is just that you can speculate on why a property has been on the market, why it has a price reduction, why the pictures look the way they do, and there are so many different reasons for those things. And I think as a buyer looking at properties, your expectations, like you said, may not be 100% accurate. You may not know the market.
Right.
We're a very unique area and have a very unique set of agents that work here. Some are local, some are not, and some are older, been in the business forever and ever, some are not. And so I think that just creates a weird variation of all different types of marketing styles. And when there's a lack of inventory just because of the population size, it just is like, makes you think like, oh, there has to be something wrong with this. Maybe there is something wrong with it, maybe there's not. And if there is, maybe it's something you're okay with and can get a good deal on. So
without a doubt.
Yeah, I think like you said, just having someone you know and trust that can guide you through this whole process and let you know what's actually normal to see and what's not normal is very important.
I agree.
All right, well, if you guys have any questions for us, or if you're interested in learning more about what other red flags you can look out for, our social media links are down below in the description. Please give us a follow. Of course, if you're listening right now, follow us on Spotify or Apple Podcast, and we will see y'all in the next one.
Thanks for hanging out with us today. We hope you found something useful or at least had a good time listening.
Yeah, if you enjoyed this episode, feel free to subscribe or share it with someone who might enjoy this content.
And if you have any questions or topics you want us to cover, reach out to us on Instagram. Everything will be linked below for you.